You guys know you're blurry right now.
Blurry?
I took my glasses off. Too close to my
I
face.
was like, oh man, we got some connection issue.
No.
All right. Well, guys, here we go. 3, 2, and 1. Hello, Salt Strong, Fish Strong Nation. We are back. A really special episode here, the Fish Strong podcast. And you might be watching this on YouTube or on the Facebook page. This is one that we thought was really important, is really unique. And a little backstory, Luke and I were at ICAST, and we ended up meeting with TFO. A lot of you who do follow us know that we love TFO. We're not sponsored by them, but we literally, just love, and I don't know how many rods behind you there, Luke, are TFO, but I'm guessing a large number of them are.
Good amount. Yeah, one of which there's probably about. I've got a handful. I've been testing out a bunch of them, but the TFO one is what I was using with the old balcony, the snook off the balcony caps.
Oh yes,
I have to like those rods after that. That was pretty cool.
If you somehow missed Luke catching a snook from the 3rd floor balcony in downtown Tampa, we'll put that video in the show notes. But we ended up talking to TFO in particular. We're talking to Frank Paul, who I believe is the president/CEO, and he gave us like a rundown on just some really cool parts of what goes into building a rod and the components and things we learned about Cork. And we're like, man, like hardly anyone knows this kind of stuff. And it has a big impact on your fishing. Obviously the cost of the rod, the longevity of the rod. It's like, hey, can we get someone on here? This is what we asked for. So Jim, you're going to have to bring it. We said someone who knows everything like an engineer, but can put it into real words, like English words that all of us fishermen can understand. So he says, Jim is your man. So we got Jim Shulin, Fort Worth, Texas, to tell us literally everything we want to know about fishing rods.
Yeah, just to make good decisions. With rod buys.
Well,
welcome, Jim.
Thank you guys for having me. I don't have Texan down. I'm not sure if I can really speak to everybody, but we'll do our darndest here.
So let's kick it off with, I'm going to say controversial, but it's not really controversial. But I've heard this debate going on in a lot of different Facebook groups and little chat groups, and even on a couple times I've been offshore and inshore fishing. Is it a fishing rod or a fishing pole?
We call it a rod, but pole has been around as long as I've been alive. So
yeah, there's some.
I've definitely heard some class, right? It's a performance tool.
There has been some debate. It seems like that is the general consensus.
Right. They're both correct. Just I think it kind of depends on where you're from.
Yeah, I had to kick it off a little fun there. We were offshore fishing, and one of the guys in the boat said, "Hey, can I borrow a couple of these poles?" And the captain said, "You can have all of them." And then he winked at me. He's like, "Because we don't have any poles on this boat, boy." He's like, "We got rods." We all started laughing. So. All right, so I know we're going to probably take this in a lot of different caveats and probably go down some rabbit holes with rod building, but you want to kind of just start off with just in general what your role is. So we kind of give an idea of what your role is at TFO, and just kind of give us like maybe rod building kind of 101, and we'll start going down some different rabbit holes.
Oh, right. Well, we can find us some rabbit holes, that's for sure. I'm in charge of all the sport fishing rods, and what that really amounts to is everything that's not bass. The whole saltwater category, salmon, steelhead rods, our trout panfish series, walleye, big fish, and it'll grow from there at some point.
Cool. And how long you been there?
Oh man, 16 years. It'll be going on 17 in October.
Wow. I'm curious how many rods you guys putting out every year at TFO?
More than one and less than all. We put out a lot of rods. That's probably not something I'd want to share, but we make a whole lot of fishing rods when you combine all of our fly rods with all of our gear and bass rods for sure.
Well, Frank Paul warned me that you were going to be a character to interview, so and tight lips.
That's
And one question I had is just the difference on say I use spinning rods most of the time, and so a saltwater spin rod. What I've been using is the professional series you guys have.
That's sure.
So like the differences on a spinning rod versus a comparative power and action rod on the bass size on the bass side or freshwater side. Like what would be like the key differences?
Well, it's a very good rod line to start with. The professional series is very well used in both salt and bass fishing communities. A 7-foot medium power blank. The big difference is what guides are strapped onto it and what reel seat is on it. It's the same. We use the same blank for both rods. They're designed to throw a certain bait range. Whatever size bait you're doing, that's what you want to match that to. But it's the same blank. The major difference is the types of guides and the handles.
And there's this different type of guide for freshwater versus saltwater?
No, actually. Well, there is yes and no. Saltwater, you definitely want to have a corrosive, a good corrosion resistant guide. Saltwater being what it is, it's so caustic. Freshwater, you don't have to worry about that rusting issue like you do, in the salt. The one thing that fish can't read, so a freshwater rod, a saltwater rod, a blank is kind of a blank. You build it to a desired action, which is where the rod bends in relationship. Closer to the tip is a fast action rod, slower as it moves down towards the butt. Then you've got your power on there, which, casting lures and or fighting fish. How much butt does the rod have? Probably some other terms that I would use that you probably don't want on the radio. But, all that design aspect is equally thought of in both fresh and salt water. The main key for saltwater rods, you got to get the action right, but they've got to be durable and corrosion resistance. You can't have rods going down. That's a really tough game. My favorite game, by the way. I love saltwater fishing.
Nice.
Cool. So when are we going? I want to know that guy from the third story, actually.
Yeah, that was a crazy catch, but yeah, because I use that TFO rod for salt, and when I do go freshwater, I use the same thing. I was wondering if so it's the same blank. It's just for the freshwater, you don't have to use the corrosion resistant material that you would in salt.
No, like for instance, in our walleye series, for instance, right now we use a guide that has a metal insert. It's an incredible good guide, but there's two differing metals, and they are not saltwater safe whatsoever. But it's an incredibly good guide. It's an incredibly good blank that may be very similar to some of the rods that we have in our new inshore series. It's a good hint.
Yeah. So, do you have a new inshore series? I know that is it GIS. The
GIS. We redesigned, re-engineered new mandrels. That particular series is still a very fast action series. It's made with an intermediate modulus material, which is really about 42 MSI. And I'm not going to bore you guys or anybody online with what that amounts to. But if you think about it as a rubber band, the higher the modulus, the tighter that rubber band is stretched. Just means the material stiffer. You don't need as much for desired stiffness, and thereby you can cut weight off of off the rod blank by using a stiffer material. Is it better? Depends. Some people think it's better because it's lighter. In certain aspects, it's not. But we redesigned those from the ground up. They've got incredible sensitivity. They're incredibly light rods. They're fast action blanks. One thing that we changed, the GIS rods were really fast, and they kind of had a long holdout. And what we mean by holdout is how stiff the butt is, right? You can bend a rod and all of a sudden you kind of feel it stop, and you kind of see it when you look down the rod blank. Most guys that are really into the high performance and the really light tackle guys in saltwater now are using braid. We still made a fast action rod, but these things will bend deep. So you get a big gator trout that comes up the surface and shakes its head. you've got to have some sort of a shock absorber in the system. Thereby, you have to engineer that into the rod with a no stretch system. Man, they balance good, and we make everything now. We added a brand new blank to that for the guys that are throwing trout with, really small jigs or tying their own, bugs for bonefish or trout. 692. So we added a light power to that, which is it's a really popular rod in Texas. I think we need to get you guys in Florida schooled up on how to use those light baits.
So I'm curious, what is the most expensive component in a rod? And let's just take inshore because it's probably the majority of our audience here.
Yeah. Oh man, guide trains and cork. You can spend, and if you go when the Fuji's got a guide train that it costs nearly $100 to put on a rod.
Wow.
Not very many people go that route. It's a very expensive guide train, but good guides are not cheap, and good cork is an expensive proposition as well.
So let's talk about the cork, because I've seen it feels like different types of cork on different rods, yours and other companies. So like how important is it to have the best cork? Like would the average Joe even know if that's like the most expensive piece? Yeah,
you definitely will be able to tell the difference between an expensive cork ring and which is a floor grade. I mean, these things they're incredible. They go on some of the nicest fly rods. The rings are tight. There's not a lot of pits in them. The lower grade you get, the bigger pits they are. You've got to fill those pits. Saltwater really tends to knock those out. So I kind of like the look, but you get these cavities that get all dirty and stuff, and that's just really kind of how cork is. Sometimes you get voids. I mean, you can even have a void in a really good cork ring where there's a hollow cavity behind it, and you don't know it. It's a really bad spot, particularly on a fly rod if it happens to be where your thumb is. But good cork is hard to come by these days too. Portugal was the main grower of cork. It's an oak tree, and they skin these things. I think the first year, 7 years it takes them before they get their first skin. The second and third years, and I don't remember the exact years. I think it's 11, and then 13. You can look that up online. I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's close. Those second two cuttings, when you shave the bark off of these trees, that's when you get the really good, thick, dense, the beautiful cork. But those cork forests are going away because they're building properties on them now. Yeah, I mean, they're building homes. The cork forests and cork trees they're going away.
So what does that mean for us?
Synthetics. We came up with a reconstituted cork on that professional series that you guys see, which taking cork, we shred it, we bond it together, and turn it just like a handle, just like you would any normal cork ring. But these things have proven to be incredibly durable.
And that's this one right here. I can kind of
yes, sir.
Up of it.
Yep.
Kind of see little small pieces all together.
Yep. Incredibly durable. And not as expensive as real cork. You can buy less grade cork and make those handles.
You said I assume reconstitute. You're saying like recycled. It's kind of ish.
It's you take cork rings, really low grade cork rings. You kind of shred this stuff up into bite-sized pieces, if you will, and you bond them together with just a cement, glue.
Wow.
And yeah, I tell you what, it's a really, really good cork material. And I don't think there's EVA foam has got a lot of play in the market. It's a good grip. It's dirty. The sun really hits it and hurts it in the long haul. Wind grips is coming out, but man, there's just something about the feel of cork that so many anglers, young and old, just actually prefer.
Yeah, that's what I've been using for a long time. I love it too. And I just going through my rods, and you're talking about the pits. Here's my tarpon rod. See if you can see it. But yeah, there's some good old pits on there, and still works great. I still love it. But I never really thought about the pits until you mentioned there's a big old pit.
Yeah, that's it. That's where the filler comes out of those eventually.
Yeah, that's not one of yours. That's one other company. That's got a St. Crowley or something there.
Do you have any split grips there, Luke?
Split grips? Yeah, I've got a variety of them. Let's see here.
Boy, there's a debate.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Do you guys have split grips? I don't know if I've seen the split grip from TFO.
We do split grips on our professional series on rods that are under 7 feet.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
We do them in our new inshore series on our 6'9" rods.
And for those of you who don't know what a split grip is, so here's the reel, and then you have, you know, kind of two different sections of grip with the main blank there in the middle. I personally prefer the straight ones, because if I use those overhead, you know, the overhead rod, you know, in the boat, I set them in the
rocket launcher. Yeah,
rocket launcher, and it'll catch. The bottom of the rocket launcher will catch right here when I'm pulling it up, and frustrating, especially when sight fishing. If I see a fish and I want to get that rod out quickly and smoothly, it'll catch right there.
Yeah.
Opposite of quickly and smoothly.
Yeah.
So what are the other debates, Jim, on that? Like, for those who maybe have only used one or the other, what are some of the other pros and cons?
Oh man, you know, it's mostly personal preference in that. To be honest with you, in my opinion, the guys like the look of the split grip. I like the look of the split grip. There's no doubt. It's a little more techy looking, and you get to see, you know, more of the exposed blank. Honestly, it costs us less to build a rod with a split grip because you don't need as much cork. Some people say that they move their hand up and down and cast it, but I'm just not buying that theory, because I can move my hand up and down, you know, both rods and cast, and I can't really tell the difference except the way the rod feels in my left hand. It's really just a personal preference. You know, you cut a little bit of weight off the overall, you know, physical weight of a rod by using a split grip. But it's a personal preference debate. That's all. That's really what it is.
Yeah, the reason I got it, I thought it looked cool as well. And then, I now stick with the straight ones, just because if I'm on a paddleboard and I make that clank of that, I have the rods on my cooler, and that'll like totally reverberate the whole board. And with sight fishing, you know, that'll actually spook some fish. So
You ever fallen onto that thing reaching for a rod?
No, not yet. Not yet.
I'm glad I put that thought in your head.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will at some point, but so far so good. The Elta, I have the catamaran paddleboard. That thing's super stable. When I go on my surfing one, that thing is any loss. I haven't taken the split grip on that one yet, but any loss of concentration, it's game over on that one.
Right. Now the 6'9" rods have a little shorter butt section, so they don't fall down quite as far. And I use those on my kayak. I mean, I've got a kind of a hybrid paddleboard kayak that I like to fish out of, and those come out of there just fine. But if you've got a longer butt section, I'm going to go full cork all the way. It's if you're using rocket launchers and rod holders, it's really the only way to go.
Cool.
So let's take it back, and for maybe a lot of these weekend warriors or even newbies, just tell us everything we want to know about power and action. And I've even been confused in times that you go like a big retail, like a Bass Pro, let's just say, and like it seems like every manufacturer has little different nuances, and like no one's on the exact same page. So like, kind of tell us everything we need to know on that.
Well, power is power. It's how stiff the rod is, and that the action is excuse me, the action is the speed. A fast action rod, as we say, when you start to put a load on it, you hang a weight off of them. The closer they bend to the tip, the faster the action, and you know, and further back becomes medium fast to moderate, to even really a slow full length action rod. You know, the good example of that would be a 9.5 foot rod that we designed, salmon or steelhead, really, for really using light monofilament. And the whole rod is a shock absorber. So if you get a hot steelhead, you've got a lot of bend and shock in the system to keep them from breaking that really light line. You know, fast action rods, when a fish jumps, that rod's going to spring back just because it's bent over a shorter segment of the rod. So, you know, it springs back quicker. They shake their head. They can get you in a bad position, and really it's easier for them to shake a hook because there's no there's no give in the rod, right? You know how you kind of bow to the king when they come out of the water, you give them some slack. The rod's kind of built in to do some of that stuff. The main thing that you know when you're getting out there and you're going to learn to do the inshore fishing is, you know, really figure out what type of baits you're going to be throwing. What are you going to do? You're going to go, you know, really shallow water, and you're going to you know, you're going to chase redfish and this stuff and sight fish for them. You're going to throw baits, you know, top water baits. You know, working a top water bait kind of requires a little stiffer tip than, say, throwing a live bait rod where you want a softer tip. You want to keep the bait on there. To work that, you know, like a top water, and you really want to walk the dog with a Czar spook type bait, a stiffer tip is going to help you get more snap on that bait, so it'll really, you know, duck and dive and entice your fish and look cool. But it's just, man, match that power, which, you know, it's a light, medium, heavy to heavy, to the type of bait you're going to be throwing. And just go from there. That's the main thing.
Is there any sort of cross manufacturer rating system for that? Because I've been testing out a bunch of different rods, and it seems like yours, I like the medium power just for like my overall rod. But in most others, it's medium heavy. I feel like yours, the TFO seemed a little bit more powerful than others on the just the straight rating scale. So I was wondering, is there like a all-inclusive type of scale out there, or is every company just kind of put their general parameter on it, and it may or may not match up to others?
You know, it can kind of vary even with manufacturers depending on the type of rod, you know, and what type of action it has. You know, if you take that professional series, which is a really nice, it's a moderate fast action rod, man, it's a great rod. We've got a ton of guys using on the boat. But if you put that, like we'll just using a 704 as an example, which is a 7-foot medium power rod, your favorite one that you're using probably. It'll feel different than our inshore series rod, because that's a faster action rod. It's made with a higher modulus material. It's stiffer. It's going to recover quicker. So if you bend it a certain way, it goes back to straight. It takes less time to go back to straight, you know, in a higher modulus rod. But for the most part, there's kind of a standard where you're, you know, 8 to 17, 1/4 to 3/4, 3/8 to an ounce, you know, these type of rod ratings. And that's kind of a standard, you know, across the board from almost all manufacturers.
I got a question.
Yeah, the one I have been using, I like the 7.6. That thing's I think awesome. It's a little bit longer, but you can sling them, but still have control. But yeah, just comparing that to I do have one of the GIS ones, one of the blue ones, but it's a longer one, so I can't really. I have the 7.9. But even comparing the medium power 7.6 professional series to pretty much all St. Croix I've used, as well as like Bull Bay rods, like they're all, I feel like I have to go up to their medium heavies to feel a similar flex, if you will, like overall flex. So I was just curious to know the difference. Yeah, it could be just a different type of material, just feels different, but it was surprising to see how the feel was different.
Yeah, those were Gary Loomis design blanks. Man, he really liked them fast, and they've got a pretty long holdout on them, which makes them feel a little bit different. But when you start really looking at the bait range, that's what they're going to really throw the best.
Gotcha.
You know, I think Rob Fordyce said it best: if you can't get the bait in front of the fish, you can't catch them. So we put a very heavy emphasis on our casting performance and fishing performance. Yeah, we don't get them perfect every time right away. So, you know, we're designing new rods. We tweak actions and you know, stiffness and you know, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 times before we get the recipe right, and the guys, you know, out in the field test and say, now you got it.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, the fact that the rod is, I think, the most important, especially for those of us who throw artificials most of the time, the rod is way more important than the reel. A lot of people overspend on the reel, when in reality, all it does is just let line, especially spinning, all it does is let the line go off the spool.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. It just goes around the bail, around the spool, and then it just retrieves line and provides drag. But, you know, the drag doesn't even matter if you can't get the lure in front of the fish and hook it. So yeah, the rod does all, you know, sets the hook, casts the bait, feels the strike, does all that stuff. So I always recommend spin more on the rod than the reel. So
I've always I'm a parity guy, right? If you spend $170 on a rod, put $170 reel on it. That's just kind of, you know, it's just, you're going to get really nice, really good paired equipment that way. Weight and feel is very important to these guys. And when you're throwing artificials, and, I mean, you're really working hard. I mean, you're a good angler at that point. You might as well match them up.
Yeah, I remember growing up, Luke, you know, we would save our money. We would mow yards and all that stuff. We had a little lawn thing we did on the side, and I would save up to buy a nice reel. Absolutely. And then the rod was like an afterthought, like, oh, I'll just get this cheap rod. And now, knowing what I know now, especially when throwing artificial lures, it's the opposite. So, Jim, knowing what you know now, I'd love to hear, you know, how do you pair up a reel with your rod? Like, what are you looking for? I love the fact you said, you know, basically dollar for dollar, because I never thought of it that way. But, like, you know, you got your rod based on what lures you're throwing. What are you looking for in a reel? And you don't have to name brands if you don't want to, but what are you looking for?
Yeah, you know, my favorite rod to throw, and you know, we got redfish. I love redfish down Texas, and I'm a sight fishing freak. So, you know, I want to see tails or cruising fish, and I want to cast to that fish. I want a nice, well balanced, you know, just a nice, well balanced outfit. I'll typically fish our 6'9" medium light or 7-foot medium light, you know, throwing jigs, things of this nature at them. And I typically put like a 2,500 or a 3,000 size reel on those two particular rods. They balance out nicely. The height is right where it lines up directly from the spool, you know, through that first gathering guide, where it's a nice line through there. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I want the size to, you don't want to put a big reel on a nice light rod like that. It's going to be bigger. There's going to be a little angle going up to that first guide. And it's really going to put just a lot of excess weight on that outfit that you do not need.
So in a store, how are you balancing them, you know, prior to line being on there?
I put them on. I put them on the rod, you know, and you get to know reels. You know, I've become pretty close with the guys in your neck of the woods, Florida Fishing Products. Man, those guys reels are bomb, man. They're light and they balance out incredibly well. But you pick a brand, you know, a Shimano. I'm a fan of the Quantum. I like the PD Smokes. You know, all these things feel really nice on a really good light, well balanced outfit. If you've got a really nice balanced rod to start with, and you put a proportionally sized reel on it, it's going to balance. It's just going to feel nice.
All right, let me state it another way. How would you know when your rod and reel are unbalanced?
Oh.
Is it just going to be based on feel? I'm trying to help out that, you know, that weekend warrior that's just getting in there. They're buying they're nervous. They're spending a lot of money, and they're like, all of a sudden they get home, they spool it up, and they're like, man, this just doesn't feel right.
Like where should there be an equilibrium?
That's exactly just what I was going to say. You kind of do that, and if it balances somewhere around, you know, around the front end of that spool, you've got a pretty nice balanced outfit. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So for those of you who can't see, it's really about put your top finger about, well, at least what I do. I put my top finger about where I'm going to be holding on the rod, and I want that to be about the balance point where you can literally just put the rod and reel assembly on your finger with the line loaded, and then and if it's there, that means that at an equilibrium point, you're not working gravity at any point. The rod's kind of
that tip feels light in your hand.
Yep. Yeah, so for those of you that couldn't see, Luke had his index finger exactly where he would be holding the rod and was literally balancing the rod with the reel on it with just one index finger.
And for you that can't see, he was jumping up and down and rubbing his belly and tapping his head.
Yeah, he wasn't even wearing a shirt. So you guys should all watch this on YouTube.
It's a very specialized process. So you have to follow it exactly like that in the store too. So make sure to take careful notes. But yeah, so that's how, I mean, there's no perfect one, at least I don't think. And because in the store, the line won't be on it in most cases. So it's kind of hard to do. Kind of have to kind of guess at it, and you'll eventually get a feel. Now I never do that anymore, but that's what I used to do, and that's why I was wondering if that's the only way to do it. If there's others.
No, that's such a really good example. Thank you for doing that. You know, you kind of go with a small reel for a smaller outfit, and you know, you get up to one of our big 8-foot heavy outfits, and you're going on a 55,000 type size reel, and maybe even bigger, going after big game. Yeah. I'd love to come down and do
that's one thing too, as far as a mistake that we used to make. Oh yeah, there's big time. Yeah, and one mistake we used to make is just getting too big of a reel. Like we'd always go at least 4,000 just because it's saltwater. There's some big fish out there, and we were that was just way more than needed. And like now like it's 2,500 to 3,000 reels. They can pack more, especially braid. They'll pack more than enough braid. Has plenty of drag, all these nice.
Yeah, braid's kind of changed that game some. Before, you know, a big spool would make your coils in that monofilament bigger, particularly when it had such bad memory. That stuff it was tough to cast, and that was ugly line. But man, braid's really changed the game. You can and the sophisticated drags these days. You can use a much smaller reel, you know, and keep a really nice outfit and still put a lot of heat on a big fish with them.
And speaking of braid, as far as the rod guides, I've seen some rod companies are saying, "Oh, we got braid." You know, I can't remember the term, but some sort of braid specific guides. You know, I don't even know if is there such a thing, or is all guides the same, or like the actual design of the guide itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's an advertising thing. It's a marketing thing as much as anything. I'm pretty certain that if you did a hardness test, almost every guide material is going to be harder than the braid. It's not that the braid is abrasive. It's what braid can pick up in the water. You know, it picks up pieces of silica or ash or sand, and all of a sudden now you got a 300-yard piece of sandpaper on your reel. So what you're really making them, what they're talking about, these really hard guides is it's harder than the material that the braid is picking up in the water, which is typically a silica. So I'm going to use ruby as an example. That's kind of one of the standards that you think about, you know, for hardness. So you want it to be that hard. Most of these guide materials these days are. I mean, even the Fuji O-rings that we put in there are very hard guides, and typically are very braid proof.
Yeah. How about the actual diameter of the guides? You know, so I've seen some that, you know, start out big and then go really small fast. Some are kind of over time they get smaller and smaller.
Right.
Pros and cons, like scientifically proven pros and cons, or
you know, that big taper from the big guide. You know, most common size guide on a spinning rod is going to be a 30, the first gathering guide. 25s are now being used quite a bit, particularly in smaller, lighter rods. Our medium light rods and even shore rods both have. I think even our medium now has a 25 for the first guide, so it's a little bit smaller. Braid comes off of the reel as a smaller plume than say monofilament does because it has less body, so you can get away with a smaller guide. And the quicker you get it through a small guide, after that, it's a matter of just making the guides as small as you can up to a point, particularly in saltwater. Some guys out there making rods with that. You know, the bass guys don't have to worry about tying a 40-pound leader onto a piece of braid like the salt guys do. They're typically tying their braid straight to their baits. They'll go through those little tiny guides just fine. But if you get any kind of a little knot or anything that comes in to your system somehow, that knot's going to have a tough time getting through those. But they're very effective. They cut a lot of weight off of that rod, and man, those guys, they want to rod as sensitive as they can. So the less weight, the more sensitive it's going to be.
Okay, so those guys, it's all about sensitivity. It's not
Yeah.
about because I was at least under the impression that the smaller ones somehow let the line go out straighter. So it's not for better casting distance. It's more about just overall sensitivity.
That's the real key. What that does, yeah.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And if we did anything smaller than say size 8, which incidentally that's 8 millimeters, the outside diameter of the ring, in the saltwater, and particularly in the Florida market, we get hollered at. They spank us pretty good. We need bigger guys. And that's going back to that. I mean, I think 40 pound mono or fluorocarbon at the end of whatever braid you use is pretty standard material when you're fishing for snook in the mangroves or things of that nature. And it's got to be big enough where it just doesn't hang up.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and those who use the FG knot, that is a thin knot that can get through the guides, but even still, it's just those smaller ones it'll eventually wear and tear down the knots if you're casting through all the time. So
right.
So yeah, I still haven't used the micro guide rods, but I've found a lot of questions have come in on our knot tutorials. Asking if the knot can slide through it. I'm like, well, if it fits, it'll fit, but it'll have a tougher time. We never did that craze. We use pretty small guides on our bass rods, but they're not in the micro guide cool
category.
and back to the on the butt of the rod is as far as the material, like cork versus like the synthetic, like the kind of the rubber that I used to use a long time ago, versus I've seen some that have almost like a graphite type. Like what's the pros and cons across that type of spectrum?
Well, if you're trolling, for instance, and you've got a pliable grip and a fish hits and you got some tension on it, those things are hard to get out of a rod holder, even if it's a straight grip, just because there's just they're a little bit sticky, and they're a little bit spongy, so they can kind of dig into the edge, and they're just a little bit tougher to pull out of a rod holder really quickly. Slit grips, I mean, that's where those came out. Big game there, but trolling rods, these guys side drift, and they do a lot of trolling for salmon in the Pacific Northwest. Everybody's gone to some sort of a woven carbon fiber butt on those, just for ease from getting them in and out of the rod holders. They'll eventually something's going to get torn up or broken coming in and out of a rod holder. I mean, it's just inevitable. You got to factor in durability on that. Wind grips, there's beautiful grip materials, but boy, those things are really sticky coming in out of a rod holder. They truly are. As much as I like the looks of them, they're really.
Are those
tough.
the rubber ones?
Yes.
Okay.
I still got wind grips on my golf clubs that are collecting dust in my garage. Great grip material, but it's I think limited saltwater application. And if I was designing them, and the guys that I would ask for advice on that, I think would probably tell me the same thing.
Yeah.
What's that, Luke?
I've still never tried one of those.
So speaking of what things are made of, what are, I guess, what are the average rods made of? And what's the highest end? So when someone is looking at a rod and they're saying, all right, this is made of carbon fiber or graphite or whatever it might be, what should they be looking for?
Well, the high performance rods are all going to be carbon fiber of some sort. And it's typically, usually, not always, but it's a unidirectional, which means all the filaments run up and down the length of the rod. And these things are like hairs, right? And so we call that unidirectional carbon fiber. And it's just hairs. To make that material so it's usable, we've got to put an epoxy resins, got to bond them with resins, and then to hold those little fine strings together, so when you bend them, they just don't all separate. You've got to have something binding them together to give you the hoop strength, and that's called a scrim. Scrim is there's a lot of different materials that you can use with scrim. There's a lot of, most of that when they talk about glass, it's usually, in a high performance rod, the glass portion is the scrim. It really doesn't affect the overall power of the rod this way. It's all hoop strength. So those are kind of the three key ingredients when you're building a carbon fiber rod. You need the carbon fiber, you need the binding material, which is the resins, and you need a scrim so that this thing holds together. You get a modulus strain, right? Or this going back to the rubber bands. We use 86 different types of recipes for our entire range of rods, fly rods all the way to offshore rods. 86 different types of materials that are used in building our rods. From the stiffest ones that we use, which would be in our new inshore series, to a more of a general carbon fiber, which is more heavily used in our new Sea Hunter series. We need those to be extremely durable. The closer this is to the rubber band breaking, it's not quite as durable as a rod that's built with a rubber band that's not stretched quite as much. The scrim materials can be incredibly heavy, incredibly light. We use a glass scrim that it's 30 grams a square meter. That's less than an ounce, and you can build 2 9-foot fly rods out of a square meter of that stuff. And then your resin percentages. It's another weight thing. This is the glue that binds everything together, and you bake it. This bakes hard, and just it traps everything inside of it. The percentages of that, as the materials have gotten better and better through the years, where the percentages you might still use a 27% resin in this, right? The voids between the hairs themselves, or the big hair versus the little hairs now, there's a lot more voids, so it used a lot more epoxy. Now it doesn't, not epoxy, resin. So all that stuff, just combines to how much weight, how much does that material, the base material, weigh?
And so on the epoxy, you mentioned epoxy. I know some put epoxy on the exterior of the rod. Does everybody do that, or is it an optional
epoxy type paint? Yeah. Most everybody does that. It gives the blank a little bit of a cushion from an errant weight hitting it. Little dings and nicks that they could get. It's a protection on the outside of the blank. If you bruise a carbon fiber blank, these things are simply hollow tubes. They've got pretty thin walls, and it's carbon fiber. If you bruise one and ding it, chances are very good that at some point that rod's going to it's already broken. It's just a matter of when it's going to fail. It's kind of like bending a sheet of paper, right? You bend it over and over and over and over. Pretty quick, it's real easy to tear. You've got a bruise in that material, and you keep bending it and bending it. It gets weaker and weaker around it. Pretty quick, it just kind of parts. It's, you're putting a little bit of extra finish on the outside of that. It's just a little more assurance that the rod's going to be a bit more durable.
Awesome.
It adds a little bit of weight, but it's a trade-off that some people make and some people don't.
What do you think's the in your 20, let's just say, years of doing this, is there a big breakthrough? Like one thing that was kind of like what I would say, like braid for fishing line was like a really big breakthrough. It was like, wow, like completely kind of changed the game. Was there something with rods, whether it be components or anything in particular?
I would say if I had been doing this longer, one of the big breakthroughs was these carbon fiber. Was a carbon fiber versus fiberglass. Fiberglass inherently is it bends. It's impossible. It's almost impossible to break. It didn't perform very well. So the carbon fiber was the big one. Just how good the carbon fibers have been, through the years. In my 20 years, when we first started off, there would have been, what was it? 7,000 strands of carbon fiber in a square centimeter. 7K, right? That's kind of what they call it, a toe count. Now there are 12,000 strands in a square centimeter. So that's been a big advancement. The material has the same kind of stretch and strain rates, but that's just allowed manufacturers to make rods lighter and, and higher performing for sure. Scrim materials have definitely gotten better through the years. That glass scrim I'm talking about, it's 30 grams. Man, that stuff was heavier in years past for sure. Resins have gotten better. They're additives that some guys use that swear that cuts weight and adds some durability. None of our tests have proven that yet, but we always experiment with it and try to stay up with the most modern carbon fibers.
It's cool. What about the future? Is there something that all the manufacturers are trying to solve next? Like, is there one big thing? Or is there anything new that you guys are testing out that's cool that you're allowed to talk about?
I'm going to win the lottery tonight. So. Man, yes, there's certainly going to be some stuff. And the thermoplastics has been one of them that we haven't really played with yet. But there's always those guys that are building these cars. And man, the guys, there's a lot more people that are using a lot more carbon fiber than we are in different industries, race cars, auto industry, electronics, airplanes. Those guys use a lot more carbon fiber than the rod business does. So we kind of draft off of them, to use a race car term. One of the things, and this is it's not an inshore rod, but our BVK rod, we use a very high modulus material in that particular rod for what can be used for to make a bendable hollow tube. We use a very high carbon fiber modulus for that. Man, those things are incredibly light. It is like driving a sports car. And it's been one of our best selling fly rod to date, period. They're incredibly light. And you pick them up and it's just like, whoa, man, great rods, but they're not a 4-wheel drive vehicle either. So just got to be a little bit more careful with them. Incredibly thin walls. Here's a funny thing. We talk about, we'll talk about a brake right now, since we're talking about carbon fibers and a hollow tube. You guys have all broken a straw in half, right?
Absolutely.
You push on either side and you break it and it buckles. When you high stick a rod and it bends, that's exactly what a rod does when it breaks for high sticking. It just kind of buckles out the side and it fails. That's how high sticking happens. Carbon fiber in general is 3 times stronger on the top end where it's being stretched than it is on the bottom end where it's being compressed. Mm-hmm. Fiberglass is almost 1-to-1, where it's almost as strong being compressed as it is being stretched. Fun facts.
That's real cool.
What?
But that's why we had you on. That's I never would have known that. Anything else like that that's unique that most people probably don't know off the top of your head? Put you on the spot.
Man, I think just getting dinged and bruised and crushed. A crush break, a rod that's got dinged, that it gets a nick on it somehow from an errant weight, or it hit the corner of the boat just perfectly when it fell. And then the high sticking, those are the 3 most common breaks that we see. I mean, sometimes you get an angry girlfriend that breaks all the rods, but it's not near as often.
I always thought that like more this is a little sarcastic, but there's so many rods that are broken in transportation, the back of trucks, or getting slammed in doors. I've done one personally than actually out on the boat fighting a fish.
Right. And those are crush breaks.
Hurt.
Sometimes you can ding it in transportation and you're out fishing and then you get that fish that pulls and he gets it down there and you're really yarding on him, and then and that point where it dinged a corner, playing it just parts. I learned about that. I run Saltwater Lodge in Belize. My first rod I broke, didn't feel like it should have broken, and sent it in, called the guys, and they explained it to me, and it totally made sense. So now I'm the one who gets to explain that.
Yes, the lesson for everybody is be careful when transporting rods. No dings.
So what else can we expect from TFO? Tell us some good news. What do you guys got coming out next?
Well, man, the rods have just not hit the market, particularly for what we're talking about, our new inshore rods, our Sea Hunter rods. Had a lot of design help from a lot of our ambassadors and pro staffers in Florida on those. So very excited about those. Those are just now hitting the market in the stores. We're going to go to work on a couple of other series of walleyes, some salmon rods, and redo some of our bass rods. So be watching for those in the future. But the good hot ones right now are our game.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, and if you guys don't know, they literally make awesome rods in pretty much every category, and including fly fishing too, which I think we'll be doing some fly fishing courses soon. So you probably hear a little bit more about TFO rods on the fly side.
Yeah, and so nice rods at great prices too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been the ones I've tested so far have been very impressive. So I'll be sure to check out the new inshore series you have going on. But yeah, so far that pro has been amazing. I've got probably 6 of them right here behind me. Big fan. So
I hope you're bending them properly as often as you can.
Yeah. No dings either.
No dings.
Actually one, my dad had him on the top rocket launcher on his T-top, went under a bridge, forgetting the rods were up there, and they got hit hard, but those things are still after it, still catching big fish on them, and
nice.
those things are strong. So they put
Not
out
every time they fall, they get hurt, but
yeah. So far so good.
Cool, guys. Well, man, thank you for the opportunity. It's fun talking to you, and anytime we can help you out or more questions, I'll be glad to come back on and shoot the bull with you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and please do if you're watching this on our blog or listening on iTunes or YouTube, definitely leave a comment. Let us know any questions you have. We'll forward them on to Jim and make sure we get a legitimate answer, not just our best guess. And Jim, where can they go?
It's probably just as good as my best guess.
Fair enough. Where can they go find out more about TFO? What's a website or social media?
TFOrods.com. Hashtag TFOrods, www.com. The whole 9 yards.
Easy enough. Well, brother, this was fun. I'm really glad Frank made this happen. He picked the right guy. You were able to basically take something that's kind of complicated and stuff that not many people know about, and I really do believe you put it into real good old boy fisherman terms. So.
Simple mind. Thank you much.
Thank you, brother. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to see and hear all of the past podcast episodes, go to saltstrong.com/podcast. You can also see a little link there to try out our fishing club completely for free for 7 days. It's a new thing we have going, 7-day free trial to the club. And I believe we might even have some discounts on rods like TFO. So,
how can I get a discount on a sticker?
Oh, you have to join the club, my friend. Have to join the club.
100% discount if you join.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Over and out.
See you, Jim.